He was only 10 years old, far too young to understand the weight of the world on his small shoulders. Yet there he stood, inside a courtroom where every eye seemed to question his very existence. He wasn't supposed to speak, he wasn't supposed to matter, but when he opened his mouth, he shattered expectations and left even the judge stunned. What could drive a child to stand against a system built to silence him? This isn't just his story, it's a mirror of ours. Before that day in court, he was just a boy of 10, energetic and curious. He lived in a neighborhood of weathered houses, families holding on to hope. His mother worked multiple jobs, love and exhaustion in her eyes for her only son. School posed challenges. Teachers expected little, classmates repeated what they heard at home, tying his worth to his skin color. But he loved law books, puzzled by why fairness seemed for some, not all. To most, he was invisible. Just another black boy in a country that too often dismissed children like him. But life was about to thrust him into the spotlight in a way no child should ever endure, because soon a courtroom would call his name. And when it did, the entire system would be forced to listen. The trouble began long before the boy ever stepped into that courtroom. It started with his mother, a hard-working woman who had done everything right, yet still found herself dragged into a fight she never asked for. One mistake, one accusation, one system that seemed determined to make an example out of her. She had fallen behind on rent when her second job cut her hours. The landlord, a man who never hid his disdain for her, saw an opportunity. He claimed she had violated the lease, painting her not as a struggling mother but as a problem that needed to be removed. Instead of working with her, he filed charges: eviction, neglect, even fraud. Words that carried heavy consequences, especially when attached to a black woman standing alone. He watched as his mother struggled with legal paperwork and walked into government offices where she was met with stares and dismissive responses, making her feel unwelcome. At night, when the boy lay in bed, he could hear his mother crying softly in the kitchen. She thought he was asleep, but her muffled sobs carried through the thin walls. He hated those nights most of all because he felt powerless. He was only 10, what could he possibly do? But something inside him refused to accept that silence was the only answer. He remembered the books he read at the library, the stories of lawyers standing tall against injustice. They weren't superheroes, they were people. People who knew the rules of a system designed to crush the voiceless, and so he started studying harder. He carried those books home, flipping through pages late into the night, tracing the words with his finger until they made sense. Then came the day of the hearing. His mother dressed in her best clothes, though the fabric was worn and faded. She tried to smile at him, tried to make him believe everything would be fine. But he saw the fear in her eyes. He felt the weight in the way she held his hand, tighter than usual, as if she knew the system wasn't built to protect them. Inside the courthouse, the air felt heavy. Lawyers shuffled past in expensive suits, their voices loud with confidence. His mother sat quietly at the back, without representation, clutching a stack of papers she barely understood. Across the room, the landlord smirked, standing beside an attorney who spoke for him with rehearsed ease. The judge entered, and the room shifted to silence. This was the moment his mother feared most, the moment her voice would be measured against a machine far larger than her. The boy looked around and saw nothing but faces that doubted her. And in that silence, something inside him broke free. He stood up. The courtroom wasn't expecting it. Neither was his mother, but he couldn't let her stand alone, not anymore. His small frame, his trembling hands, his pounding heart, none of it mattered. What mattered was the truth he was about to speak, because he was no longer just a boy in the back row. He was about to be his mother's only lawyer. The room went still as the boy's voice broke through the silence. At first, it was small, almost fragile, like a whisper carried into a storm. But the words themselves were impossible to ignore. He declared what no one expected to hear, that he would speak for his mother, that he was her lawyer. Laughter rippled through the courtroom, quick, sharp, dismissive. The landlord's attorney smirked. A clerk shook her head. Even the judge raised an eyebrow, as if to remind the boy this was no place for childish games. But he did not sit down, he did not falter. With every shaky breath, he grew stronger. He spoke about his mother, how she worked until her hands ached, how she sacrificed sleep just to keep food on the table. He told them how she wasn't lazy, she wasn't negligent, she was a survivor. He reminded the room that the charges weren't just about paperwork, but about a system that punished people like her for being poor, for being black, for daring to exist in spaces they were never meant to occupy. Every eye turned to him now, some with pity, some with disbelief, but none could look away. His words, unpolished and raw, carried more truth than any lawyer's arguments. He pointed to the landlord, exposing the lies, the neglect, the prejudice that had fueled this battle. From the beginning, the judge's face hardened, the gavel struck once, demanding order. But the boy's words had already cut through the silence like lightning, impossible to erase. For a moment, time seemed to stop. A 10-year-old child had done what grown men with degrees and titles often failed to do. He forced a courtroom to see humanity in the face of injustice. And as he stood there, trembling but unbroken, one question lingered in the air: would the system finally listen or crush him for daring to speak? The boy's words echoed long after he finished. The courtroom was no longer a place of quiet dismissal, it was a place forced to confront its own reflection. The judge, once skeptical, leaned forward, studying the child who had dared to challenge the weight of an entire system. Papers shuffled, voices murmured, but no one could erase what had just been said. In the end, his mother was not silenced. The eviction was halted. The landlord's accusations, built on bias and cruelty, crumbled under the weight of truth spoken by a child too brave for his years. It wasn't a perfect victory. There would still be struggles, still be nights of worrying, still a system that looked at families like theirs with suspicion rather than compassion. But in that moment, they had won something larger than a case. They had reclaimed dignity. For the boy, the courtroom was more than a battleground. It was a lesson, a reminder that even the smallest voice could pierce through injustice when fueled by courage and love, yet it was also a reminder of how wrong it is that a child had to carry such a burden in the first place, because this story isn't just about one boy or his mother. It's about every family pushed to the edge by a system that claims to stand for justice, yet too often bends under the weight of prejudice. So the question remains, how many more children will have to grow up too soon just to defend the people they love, and when will we finally create a world where no child has to be their mother's lawyer just to be heard?